The early winter in northern Arizona always carried a quiet warning. But that year, it felt heavier than usual. The sky had been gray since morning, and the wind moved through the land like a traveler searching for a place to rest. Jack Turner, a rancher in his mid-30s, felt the change in the air long before the first snowflake touched the ground. He had lived on that ranch his whole life and understood the moods of the land better than the words of most people. Jack stood outside his barn, tightening the collar of his jacket. His horses shifted restlessly, picking up on the storm that was coming. He spoke to them softly, the way someone speaks to old friends. He checked the gates, the roofs, and the feed one last time. He had done this routine every winter, but something in his chest felt unsettled. Maybe it was just the cold. Maybe it was the silence that came with it. By late afternoon, the snowfall began, slow at first, then steady. Jack saddled his horse and decided to make one last round near the edge of his land. He wanted to make sure no animals had wandered off. The wind pushed against him as he rode, and the cold touched his skin like ice. The world around him grew white, and the sky and earth seemed to blend into each other. He followed the familiar trail toward the far boundary of his property. The land stretched long and wide, with scattered trees and soft rolling hills. He knew every turn, every fallen log, every place where the wind whistled a different tune. As he rode farther, he noticed something unusual. At first he thought it was just a dark shape in the snow, but the closer he got, the more he realized it was a person. Jack slowed down and stopped his horse a few feet away. The figure was sitting near a tree, wrapped in a thin blanket. Snow had collected in her hair and on her clothes. She looked tired, cold, and unsure of where she was. Jack felt his heart pound with worry, but he approached carefully so he wouldn't startle her. "Ma'am?" he called out gently. "Are you all right?" The woman lifted her head. Her eyes were dark and calm, but there was exhaustion in them. She looked like she had been walking for a long time. Jack noticed that she was an Apache woman, perhaps in her late 20s, with long black hair and a face that carried both strength and softness. I got separated," she said softly. Her voice trembled from the cold. "The storm came fast." Jack nodded. He didn't ask too many questions. He could see she needed warmth more than conversation. "My cabin isn't far," he said kindly. "You shouldn't stay out here. The cold's only getting worse." She hesitated, as if unsure whether to trust him. Jack understood. Out on the land, trust was something earned, not taken. So he stepped back slightly, keeping his voice steady. "You can ride with me or walk beside me, but if we stay here, it'll get dangerous." After a moment, she agreed. Jack helped her onto the horse, and they rode back slowly through the growing storm. The snow fell harder now, and the wind felt sharper. Jack held the reins tight, guiding them through the whiteness that made the land almost unrecognizable. He could feel the woman shivering behind him, and he urged the horse forward. By the time they reached the cabin, the storm had grown stronger. Jack helped her down and led her inside. The warm air inside the cabin wrapped around them like a blanket. The cabin wasn't fancy, just a single room with a fireplace, a small kitchen, and a wooden bed in the corner. But it was safe, warm, and dry. Jack took off his jacket and offered her a seat near the fire. "Sit close. You're freezing." She nodded and moved toward the warmth. Her hands shook as she held them out toward the flames. Jack poured her a cup of warm broth he had prepared earlier, and she accepted it gratefully. "My name is Jack," he said after a moment, keeping his tone gentle. "What should I call you?" "Naya." "That's a beautiful name," Jack said with a small smile. "Do you feel any better?" "A little," she said, taking small sips. She looked around the cabin slowly, taking in the place. "Thank you for helping me." "You don't owe me thanks," Jack replied. "Anyone would have done the same." She looked at him in a way that told him she wasn't sure she believed that. But she didn't say anything. She just pulled the blanket tighter around herself. Jack kept the fire fed, adding logs and adjusting the heat. Outside, the wind howled like a long, distant call. Snow slapped against the window, building up on the edges. The storm was in full force now, and Jack knew they were lucky to have made it back when they did. "You said you were separated?" Jack asked softly, not wanting to overwhelm her. She nodded. "My group was moving through the area. We knew the storm was coming, but it came sooner than we expected. I was gathering herbs near the hills, and by the time I realized how fast the snow was falling, I couldn't find my way back." Jack listened carefully. Her words were slow, and he could hear the worry beneath them. "They'll look for you when the weather clears," he said with confidence. "You'll see them again." Naya nodded, though anxiety still lingered in her eyes. As time passed, the cabin grew warmer, but the cold outside grew even stronger. The rest of the evening passed with simple conversation. Jack told her about his ranch, how he lived alone and cared for the land. Naya spoke quietly about her people, their traditions, and how they followed the seasons with care and respect. Her voice carried a kind of peace that made Jack listen with full attention. When night began to fall, the temperature dropped even more. Jack checked the windows and the walls, making sure everything was sealed. But as he touched the logs stacked by the door, he felt the icy air leaking in. The storm was a harsh one, stronger than any he had seen in years. Naya watched him with a thoughtful expression. She had lived through many winters in the mountains. She knew the signs of dangerous cold, the kind that could take a life quietly while someone slept. "You know the temperature will fall too much tonight," she said softly. Jack nodded. "I know. I'll keep the fire strong." "That should help." She shook her head gently. "A fire won't be enough. Not tonight." Jack looked at her, unsure what she meant. Naya met his eyes with calm confidence, as if she had made peace with the truth already. "If we don't share a bed," she said quietly, "we'll freeze." Jack felt a moment of surprise. Not because of the words, but because of her honesty. She wasn't embarrassed or unsure. She was speaking from knowledge, from experience. Out here, the cold didn't care about shyness or uncertainty. It was simple. Either survive or suffer the consequences. Jack swallowed, choosing his words carefully. "I don't want you to feel uncomfortable. It's not about comfort," she said, her voice steady. "It's about staying alive. Body warmth is stronger than any fire we can make tonight." Jack looked at her again, truly seeing the seriousness in her eyes. She wasn't suggesting anything improper. She was stating a fact, the same way she might explain how to track an animal or identify a useful plant. He nodded slowly. "All right. If that's what we need to do, we'll do it." Naya gave a small nod of appreciation. Jack prepared the bed, adding extra blankets and placing it near the fire for as much warmth as possible. He moved with care, wanting her to feel safe. Naya watched him and understood that he was a good man, thoughtful and respectful. When they lay down, they kept a respectful space between them at first. But the cold crept through the blankets quickly, pressing them closer without a single word being spoken. It wasn't awkward. It wasn't strange. It simply felt like two human beings fighting the same battle against the winter. As the wind howled outside and the cabin shook slightly from the force of the storm, Jack and Naya lay quietly, sharing warmth, sharing breath, and sharing a strange, unexpected trust. Neither of them knew what the next day would bring. But for that night, they had each other, and that was enough to survive. By the time morning arrived, the storm had not calmed at all. In fact, the wind sounded louder, and the snow pushed against the cabin with even more strength. Jack woke up slowly, blinking at the dim light that filtered through the frosted window. He felt the cold air brushing his face and knew the temperature must have dropped even more overnight. Beside him, Naya was still asleep, her breathing slow and steady. Her long hair fell across her face, and she looked peaceful, as if the storm outside had no power over her dreams. Jack didn't move for a moment. He didn't want to disturb her, or let cold air slip under the blankets. He quietly got up, careful not to let the blankets shift too much. The moment he stepped out of the bed, a sharp wave of cold wrapped around him. He crossed his arms tightly and walked toward the fireplace. The fire had died down during the night, Only a few glowing embers remained. Jack added more wood, blowing gently to bring the flames back. Within minutes, the room began to grow warmer again. The sound of crackling fire slowly filled the space, pushing back some of the cold that had settled inside. Naya stirred at the sound, her eyes opening slowly. She sat up, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. "Is the storm still here?" she asked quietly. Jack nodded. "Worse than yesterday." Naya didn't seem scared, only thoughtful. "Winter storms like this don't pass quickly," she said. "But they pass stronger if the land needs it." Jack smiled a little at her way of speaking. She talked about nature like it was a person she knew well. Warmth from the fire spread slowly through the room, and soon Naya joined him near the hearth. They sat quietly for a while, listening to the wind outside. Jack cooked a simple breakfast of warm beans and bread. Naya thanked him softly and ate with calm manners. There was something peaceful about the way she moved, something steady that made the small cabin feel less lonely. As the morning went on, the storm refused to weaken. Snow piled higher against the cabin walls, and the windows shook each time the wind roared. Jack walked around the small space, checking for any cold drafts. Naya watched him with careful eyes. "You live alone here?" she asked eventually. Jack nodded. "Been that way for a few years now. Just me and the animals. Don't you get lonely?" He paused, thinking. "Sometimes. But the ranch keeps me busy. And the land, well, it becomes your friend after a while." Naya nodded slowly, understanding. She had spent most of her life outdoors, moving with her people from place to place. The land was something she respected deeply. The rest of the morning passed quietly. Naya helped Jack mend small cracks where the cold air slipped in. She moved with purpose, using her hands skillfully. Jack noticed how she understood the structure of the cabin. Even though she had never been inside before, she seemed to understand how everything worked by simply looking at it. "You've done this before?" Jack asked with a curious smile. "My people build shelters wherever we go," she replied. "We learn how to work with wood, earth, whatever the land gives us." Jack felt impressed. He had always taken pride in his own self-sufficient skills, but Naya had a kind of calm, natural confidence that came from years of learning from the land itself. By the afternoon, the storm was still not showing any sign of slowing. The snow outside rose almost halfway up the window. Jack knew they would not be leaving the cabin anytime soon. Naya sat near the fire again, her legs tucked under her blanket. Jack sat across from her, sipping warm tea. For a while, neither of them spoke. The quiet between them wasn't uncomfortable. It felt peaceful, like two people simply sharing the same moment. After a long silence, Naya looked up. "You have lived here your whole life?" "Pretty much," Jack said. "My parents built the ranch. When they passed on, I took care of it." "That must be a lot of responsibility," she said softly. Jack nodded. "It is. But it's home. Everything I know comes from this land." Naya's eyes softened. "Your heart belongs here." Jack looked at her for a moment, surprised at how accurately she said it. "Maybe it does." Naya folded her hands. "My people move with the seasons. We don't stay in one place for too long. But still, we feel the same connection. The land becomes part of your spirit." Jack listened carefully. Her words carried a weight that made him think differently about the space around them. He had always felt something toward the land, something like a quiet bond, but he had never heard someone express it the way she did. As the hours passed, they shared stories, not dramatic ones, just simple ones from their lives. Naya told him about her grandmother, who taught her how to identify herbs and plants. She spoke about nights under the open sky, listening to stories told by the elders around a fire. Jack told her about caring for horses, about learning to fix fences and roofs, and about the small joys of ranch life, sunrise on the hills, the sound of cattle moving through the fields, and the calm that came with doing something meaningful with his hands. The more they talked, the more Jack realized how much he enjoyed listening to her. Naya didn't speak loudly or boastfully. Her words were gentle, yet meaningful. The afternoon slowly turned into evening. The storm continued its wild dance outside, shaking the cabin walls as if trying to enter. When night began to settle in, Jack checked the fireplace again. "It's going to get colder," he said, more to himself than to her. Naya nodded. She already knew. The wind outside carried the kind of sound that warned even the strongest hearts. She pulled her blanket closer around her shoulders. Silence filled the cabin for a moment. Then Naya looked at Jack and said, "We'll need to share the bed again." Jack felt a slight nervousness rise inside him, not from fear or discomfort, but from the simple truth of how unusual the situation was. But he also knew she was right. The night before had proven how dangerous the cold could be. "I understand," Jack said gently. "It's the safest thing to do." Naya seemed relieved that he didn't question it. She could tell he respected her and wasn't thinking anything improper. That gave her comfort. As Jack prepared the bed again, Naya watched him with a calm expression. "I am grateful you opened your home to me," she said quietly. "You would have done the same," Jack replied. She tilted her head slightly. "Most people are kind, but not everyone offers help so easily." Jack shrugged modestly. "Well, I couldn't just leave you out there." Naya gave a small, sincere smile. It was the first time he had seen her smile clearly, and it warmed the room more than the fire did. When they settled into the bed again, they did so the same way as before, calmly, respectfully, without saying much. The cabin, once again, grew quiet, except for the storm's distant roar. This time, though, something felt slightly different. Not uncomfortable, not strange, just different. Maybe it was because they had talked so much during the day. Maybe because their trust had grown without them realizing it. The cold reached them quickly, pressing them together again. But tonight, the closeness didn't feel like something driven only by survival. It felt like something gently built throughout the day, an understanding, a shared silence, a warmth beyond the blankets. They lay in the dark, listening to the wind, knowing the world outside was frozen and wild. But inside the small cabin, they were safe, warm, and unexpectedly connected. Sleep found them slowly, as the fire glowed softly in the corner, and the storm continued its long song through the night. When morning arrived, the storm had finally softened, though the cold still pressed against the cabin walls. Jack woke to a faint glow of sunlight, pushing its way through the frost-covered window. It was the first time in days that any natural light had touched the cabin, and for a moment, he simply stared at it with quiet relief. Naya was already awake, sitting near the fire, warming her hands. Her calm face glowed softly in the rising light, and her hair fell over her shoulders in loose waves. She looked peaceful, but her eyes held a thoughtful seriousness, as if she was listening to something only she could hear. Jack got up, stretching after 2 nights of sleeping close for warmth. "Storm's lighter today," he said as he walked toward the window. Naya nodded. "Yes. The wind is slower. The air is still sharp. But it is changing." Jack smiled a little. "You can tell just by listening?" She gave a small shrug. "It's something we learn from childhood. The wind has many voices." Jack opened the door carefully. A cold blast rushed inside, but the brightness of the morning was welcoming. The world outside was covered in a thick, untouched blanket of snow. The hills, trees, and fences had disappeared under white curves. It was beautiful, but also overwhelming. "It'll take days to clear all that," Jack murmured. Naya stepped beside him, looking out at the wide, snowy land. "It looks peaceful now," she said softly. "But it must have been a hard night for the animals." Jack nodded, already thinking about the work ahead. He knew the barn roof needed checking, the animals needed feed, and some fences had likely fallen under the weight of snow. But he also knew he couldn't leave Naya alone in the cabin, not with snow piled so high. "You stay warm here," Jack said gently. "I'll check the barn. Won't be long." Naya shook her head slowly. "I will come with you." "You don't have to," Jack replied. "It's cold. And the snow." "I know the cold," Naya said with a small, steady smile. "And I can help." Jack hesitated only a moment before nodding. He understood she wasn't someone who liked sitting still while others worked. Her spirit was the kind that moved with purpose. They bundled up in warm clothes, layered blankets, and thick jackets. Jack handed her an extra pair of gloves, and she accepted them gratefully. Together, they stepped out into the cold world. The snow reached almost up to their knees in some places. Jack walked ahead, clearing a path, while Naya followed, her steps quiet but sure. The cold air bit at their faces, but the sun made the world sparkle like untouched glass. When they reached the barn, Jack took a deep breath of relief. The roof was still intact, though weighed down. The doors were frozen at the edges, but he pushed them open with effort. Inside, the horses snorted softly, their warm breath fogging the air. "They're okay," Naya said with relief. Jack moved quickly, checking the water and feed. Naya helped him carry hay, brushing snow off the animals' backs and speaking to them in a soothing, gentle voice. The horses calmed immediately under her touch. "You're good with them," Jack said. She smiled faintly. "Animals feel our energy. If we are calm, they stay calm." They worked quietly for a while. The barn felt warm compared to the outside, and Jack felt grateful to have extra hands. Every small task became easier with her help. When they finished, they headed out toward the fields. The fences were half buried, and some sections had fallen. Jack sighed softly. "It'll take days to fix all this." Naya examined the broken posts carefully. "We can gather wood later," she said. "Not all at once. Step by step." Jack appreciated the simplicity in her words. He often tried to handle everything alone, carrying more weight than he needed. But with Naya there, the work felt lighter, balanced. They walked slowly through the land, checking the areas where Jack knew problems tended to happen. Naya observed everything with thoughtful eyes, examining the snow, the wind direction, the shape of the land, as if reading a story written in nature. "You understand the land better than most people I've met," Jack said. "It teaches us if we listen," she replied softly. "The snow tells how long the storm stayed. The wind tells where it came from. The tracks show which animals walked here during the night." Jack smiled. "You make it sound easy." "It isn't easy," she said, glancing at him with a gentle expression. "But it becomes familiar." They returned to the cabin when the cold started biting through their clothes. Jack fed the fire again, and Naya boiled water for tea. They sat near the warmth, tired but calm, feeling the comfort of the small home around them. After a long, peaceful silence, Naya looked at him. "My people will search for me once the land clears." Jack nodded, though the thought made something in his chest tighten. "I'm sure they will. I should be ready," she added. Her voice was soft, but her words held a weight he could feel. Jack looked into the fire. Naya leaving was something he had always known would happen. But now that the moment felt close, he realized he didn't want it to come too soon. He had grown used to her presence, the way she moved, the way she spoke, the calm strength she carried with her. But he didn't say anything. He didn't want to make the situation heavy for her. Later in the day, the sunlight grew stronger, melting thin layers of snow on the roof. Naya stepped outside for a moment, listening to the land the way she always did. When she returned, her expression had changed, her eyes filled with meaning. "There are tracks," she said softly. "Fresh ones. My people are near." Jack felt the breath catch in his throat. He stood slowly, not sure what to say. Naya placed her blanket back on the chair and stood with quiet grace. Not even 10 minutes later, shapes appeared in the distance, several figures moving across the snow-covered land. Jack recognized the calm but purposeful way they walked. They were Naya's people. He stepped out of the cabin with her as they approached. An older man came forward, his face lined with wisdom and relief. "Naya," he called. She stepped toward him with a smile, and they shared a warm embrace. Her people looked at her with love and worry, examining her gently to make sure she was unharmed. Jack stood a few steps behind, watching quietly. He felt relieved that she was safe with her people, but he also felt a quiet sadness he couldn't hide. Naya walked back to him after speaking briefly with them. She looked into his eyes, and for a moment, the whole world felt silent. "Thank you, Jack," she said softly. "You saved my life." "You saved mine too," Jack replied. "Twice." She smiled, touched by his words. "I will not forget what you did. Or your kindness." Jack nodded, his voice quiet. "I'm glad you made it back to them." Naya looked at him for a long moment, her eyes gentle but full of something unspoken, something that didn't need words. Then she turned to rejoin her people. Jack watched them walk away slowly, their figures shrinking into the snowy landscape. He stayed outside until they disappeared completely behind the hills. When he finally stepped back into the cabin, the place felt strangely empty. The silence felt different now, deeper. The warmth of the fire didn't reach as far as it did before. A part of the world that had once felt, still now, felt hollow. But he knew this was the way of life. People came, people left, and memories stayed behind like footprints in the snow. That night, Jack lay alone in the bed for the first time in days. The cold felt sharper. But it wasn't the weather. It was the quiet space beside him. He pulled the blankets close and closed his eyes, remembering the calm of her voice, the way she listened to the wind, the strength she carried like a gentle flame. He didn't know if he would ever see her again. But he knew the storm had brought her into his life for a reason, and that reason would stay with him long after the snow melted. Spring came slowly to the ranch that year. The snow melted little by little, turning the white fields into soft, shining streams of water that trickled down the hills. The land began to wake up again. New grass pushed through the soil, and the trees stretched their branches toward the warmer sun. Birds returned, their songs filling the quiet mornings. But even as the world around him changed, Jack felt something inside him remain still. He went through his daily chores, feeding the horses, repairing fences, checking the fields, but a part of his mind always drifted back to the days he had spent with Naya. Sometimes he found himself turning toward the hills, half expecting to see her walking through the long grass, her hair moving with the wind. She never appeared. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. Life moved forward, but the memory of Naya stayed close, woven through each corner of the ranch like a thread that couldn't be pulled loose. Jack didn't fight the memories. He accepted them. They came gently, like quiet reminders of a time that had changed him. One warm afternoon, Jack saddled his horse and rode to the far side of his land. The sky was bright, dotted with soft clouds. The breeze carried the scent of early flowers. It was the kind of day that made a man breathe a little deeper. As he rode past the fence line, he reached the hill where he had first found Naya during the snowstorm. He stopped there, looking at the spot. The world was completely different now, green instead of white, warm instead of frozen, but he could still remember that moment clearly. He sat there a long time, letting his thoughts drift. He wondered where she was. Was she living in the mountains again? Was she traveling with her people? Did she remember him the way he remembered her? He smiled sadly at himself. It wasn't the kind of connection a man forgot easily. As he turned his horse to head back, he noticed something unexpected on the ground, small footprints. Too small to belong to a deer or a horse. They were human footprints, fresh ones. He dismounted quickly and examined them closely. The prints were delicate, but sure. They led down the hill and toward the trees. His heart beat faster, though he didn't want to assume anything. Maybe it was a traveler, maybe it was someone from a nearby village, but something inside him told him otherwise. He followed the footprints slowly, carefully. The path curved between trees, crossed a narrow stream, and climbed a small rise. At the top, Jack stopped, his breath catching quietly in his chest. There she was. Naya stood at the edge of the hill, looking out at the open land. The wind lifted her long hair gently, and sunlight warmed her skin. She looked exactly as he remembered, calm, graceful, and connected to the world around her, as if she'd grown from the land itself. For a moment, Jack couldn't move. He felt every emotion rush through him at once: relief, surprise, happiness, disbelief. It felt like seeing a part of the past step quietly into the present. Naya turned slowly, sensing his presence even before he made a sound. When she saw him, her eyes softened. She smiled not just with her lips, but with her whole face, as if she had been waiting for this moment too. Jack took a few steps forward. "Naya." She nodded lightly. "Hello, Jack." He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "You came back." "I did," she said, her voice soft but certain. Jack walked closer, not wanting to rush, not wanting to break the fragile magic of the moment. "I wasn't sure if I'd ever see you again." I wasn't sure if I'd ever see you again." Naya looked out over the land before answering. "I wasn't sure either. My people move often. Our home changes with the seasons. But," she paused, choosing her words carefully, "some things stay in the heart no matter where we travel." Jack felt his chest tighten in a warm, gentle way. "You've been well? I hope?" "Yes," she said with a nod. "My people welcomed me back. They were thankful I was safe. But she hesitated, then looked into his eyes. "I missed the peace I felt here." Jack's voice grew quiet. "This place was different with you here." Naya's expression softened even more. "Storms bring challenges, but they also bring new paths. Sometimes the land decides who we meet." They stood together in silence for a moment, listening to the breeze and the distant rustle of leaves. It wasn't an awkward silence. It felt calm, full, and connected. Jack finally spoke. "Would you like to come to the cabin?" Naya nodded gently. "I would like that." They walked back slowly, side by side. It felt natural, as if no time had passed. When they reached the cabin, Naya paused at the doorway, her eyes studying it with a thoughtful expression. "It looks the same," she said softly. "Not much changes around here," Jack replied with a small smile. "Except maybe the person inside." Naya looked at him knowingly. "And that is not a small change." Inside the cabin, everything felt familiar yet new. The bed, the fire, the small kitchen, each corner carried memories of the storm, the shared warmth, and the quiet companionship. Naya walked toward the window, touching the wooden frame lightly. "The snow was so deep then," she said quietly. "We didn't know if morning would bring calm or more storm." Jack stepped beside her. But morning came, and so did peace. Naya looked up at him. "And trust." Jack nodded. "And trust." They sat together near the fire, not because of cold now, but because it felt like the right place to be. Naya told him stories of where she had traveled since leaving. Mountains covered in mist, nights under star-filled skies, new rivers, new valleys, new singing birds. Jack listened, his eyes never leaving her face. He told her about repairing the ranch after the storm, about the long, quiet winter, and about the quiet emptiness he had felt after she left. Naya's eyes softened again. "I didn't want to leave without saying something more," she said. "But the storm had just ended. My people were waiting, and I was not sure if it was the right moment." Jack shook his head gently. "You had to go. I would never hold you back. But I came back," she said softly. Jack met her gaze. "Yes, you came back." Silence settled again, but this time it was warm, filled with meaning. Jack took a slow breath and asked, "Will you stay for a while?" Naya did not answer quickly. She looked around the cabin, at the land outside, at the sky that stretched wide and bright. Then she turned back to him. "I don't know what the future brings," she said honestly. "But I know that my heart feels peaceful here. And peace is something worth following." Quote, Jack felt a deep, quiet happiness rise inside him. "Then stay as long as your heart wants to." Naya smiled softly. "Then I think I will stay for a time." The sun dipped lower outside, casting warm golden light across the floor. Jack added a log to the fire, and the flames rose gently, filling the cabin with soft warmth. As evening settled in, they shared a simple meal, laughing softly at memories and stories. The warmth between them was not forced or uncertain, it flowed naturally, built from trust, respect, and something deeper that neither needed to name. Later, as the stars appeared in the sky, Jack stepped outside for a moment. Naya joined him. They stood together, watching the wide, clear night above them. It felt like the world was opening new paths for them, quiet ones, gentle ones. The wind that touched their faces was no longer cold or harsh. It was soft, almost welcoming, as if the land itself approved of their reunion. Naya looked at Jack and said quietly, "Storms pass, but some connections stay." Jack looked back at her, his voice steady and warm. "Some connections become home." And in the quiet night, under the soft glow of stars, they stood side by side, not because of the cold this time, but because life had brought them back to each other, for a reason neither could ignore. Their story did not end with the storm. It began because of it. And as long as the land remained wide and the sky remained open, their paths would no longer drift apart.